super excited tonight to have Aaron Dixon speak to us on the legacy of the Black Panther Party. You know, it was one of those things where I was thinking about how can we, how perfect it is to be talking about this, and I wanted to talk about sort of like this concept of being able to be here in Boston today and put this in sort of like a global crisis, a global understanding of an economic crisis and the resistance that we're starting to see against that. And then Hugo Chavez died this week, as many people know, and you may have criticisms of his politics. That's okay, but the depth at which the ruling class and their media began to rewrite the history of the Venezuelan people and their role in a revolutionary process to challenge capitalism is utterly disgusting to me to watch in the mainstream media, and I feel like this is one of those things to be able to reach back into history and to be able to talk about not only the legacy of the Black Panther Party as a revolutionary party organized as internationalists attempting to challenge capitalism. I think it's important for us, and we'll have a chance tonight with our two amazing speakers to talk how did we get from the Black Panther, or the Black Power movement overall, and the role the Black Panther Party played in that, to today where we have the new Jim Crow. I think there's real opportunities for us, and I just came from UMass where we had 70 students at UMass who participated in this conversation earlier today. And it's an amazing conversation to have, and we're very lucky to have Cree Peterson-Smith and Aaron Dixon tonight. Cree is an ISO member. He's a graduate student at Clark University. His article on We Are All Trayvon, 1 year after Trayvon Martin's death, is in the current issue, The Socialist Worker. He's an anti-imperialist, a longtime Palestinian rights activist, and we're happy to have him here with us today. He will be speaking on how we got from the Black Power movement to the new Jim Crow. Let's give it up for Cree.
Thank you, and I want to be quick because y'all are in for a treat with brother Aaron Dixon. Absolutely. The topic of this meeting is the Black Power Revolt in the 1960s. Obviously, Brother Dixon can speak to that much more eloquently than I can, both with his knowledge and his experience of that era. And so what I actually want to do is start with today. I want to talk about 2013. And just start with a couple of months ago, on January 14th, tell a story about a young brother who was 18 years old, young black man named Kevin Clark, who was walking home from school, it's a college student, when he was approached by two police officers on motorcycles. And one of the cops started riding his motorcycle toward Kevin, which prompted Kevin to say, "What are you doing? You're trying to run me over?" And it was at that moment that both the cops jumped off their motorcycles and tackled Kevin to the ground. And they were holding him down, putting his face in the pavement, and pulling his hands behind his back, and of course calling for backup. And so another police car arrives, and all in all, 10 additional cops came to deal with this one young brother, as well as the people who were gathering, the other youth of color who were gathering around the scene. Now, this could have happened in any city in the United States. It happened to take place in San Francisco, in the Mission District. And I wanted to start here because I think that it says a lot about our society in 2013 and a lot about the state of racism in our society in 2013. I'm just curious, how many people have heard of Kevin Clark and heard of this incident? Okay, so a handful of people. The fact that this wasn't, and that's not your fault that you didn't know this, the fact that this wasn't national news, I think says a lot about the state of racism in this country. Frankly, it wasn't even huge news locally in the Bay Area. And we wouldn't know about it at all. Both people in the Bay Area and certainly people outside wouldn't know about it at all had it not been video recorded by somebody who caught the whole thing on her phone. Now, watching that video, which if you have the stomach to, it's worth doing, a number of things are clear. First, just the violence of policing that happens every day in this country, particularly toward black and brown people. That violence is not, the violence that was visited upon Kevin Clark was not an aberration, but actually that's the typical modus operandi of the police. Two is the utter contempt with which they have for Kevin and for the young people gathering around the scene. But I think the thing that comes across most clearly in the video is the cops' fear of Kevin. Their fear of him and their fear of the young people gathering around. And why else, of course, would they send 12 cops to deal with one unarmed young man who didn't even provoke the situation? They provoked the situation. That's fear. And what I want to argue is that what exists on the part of the police, and police in every city in this country, and on the part of the people who run this country, is a deep fear, not just of one young black man, but of the entire black population. And when you hear the words of Aaron Dixon, when you hear the history that he made, along with countless other people, and the history that he carries, it becomes very clear why they're afraid of the black population. It is because since before the founding of this country, black people have comprised, I would argue, especially exploited and oppressed part of the population. That has been true whether we were enslaved, that was true when we were sharecroppers, that was true when this country industrialized and we were forced into the most dangerous and lowest paying jobs. That has been true in our role as soldiers in every war since the Civil War, starting with the conquest of the continent. People may have heard of the so-called Buffalo Soldiers. We were on the front lines of the conquest of the frontier, right through today in Iraq and Afghanistan. We have played the role, and we've been assigned what soldiers in Vietnam called suicide missions. That is, the most deadly missions is where black soldiers were sent. We have played that role as especially oppressed group of people, as unemployed people, desperate enough to take the lowest paying jobs, and so on. Our oppression has been essential to the establishment of the country, and I would argue it was not just essential historically, it remains a feature of American society today. That is an essential part of American society today. It goes without saying, of course, that this country was founded on slavery, this massive, criminal, and cruel exploitation of black people. And it was so essential that it was woven into the very fabric of the country. As somebody, I was actually, this week I happened to be in Georgia, thank you. And in Georgia, the legacy of slavery and the Civil War are not these historically distant things. It's very clear today. Here in the North, and as somebody who grew up in the North, we learned that this is an historical thing that existed at a certain time in a certain place, and something that's very distant. That's not true. Slavery was not just a Southern thing, it was an American thing. It was written into the Constitution and woven into the fabric of this country. But there's a flip side of this, because while we have been a especially oppressed group of people in the society, while our exploitation was essential to making this the most powerful country in the world, I would argue, there has been a price to pay for the people who run this country. As we have been exploited and oppressed, we've also been volatile and a revolting group of people. From slave revolts to the civil rights and black power movements to prison revolts to strikes, black people have periodically resisted throughout U.S. history. And not just resisted, but posed a challenge to the whole order of things. I would argue that because oppression in general in society is a deeply oppressive society, despite what they say about it being the land of the free. I would argue that the oppression of black people in particular, from the start of this country, has been at the heart of society, and therefore our resistance, our struggle, goes right to the heart of a society, and it shakes the thing right to the core. If you look at the civil rights movement, when people were demanding the right to sit in front of a bus, or the right to sit at an unsegregated lunch counter, and so on, to go to schools that white children went to, the response was dogs, fire hoses, incredible violence, assassinations, to a point where it became routine. It's clear that that struggle was about more than just the right to sit in front of a bus. It was about more than just the right to drink at the same water fountain as white folks. It was a question of what kind of society we're going to have. That is the question that I believe mass black struggle has posed. And that has been true from the very start. From the start, the people who run this country have been living in fear of a revolt of black people. I just want to read a brief, but I think very incisive statement by Thomas Jefferson, one of the so-called founding fathers. He said this in 1820 when writing about slavery in a letter. He said, he's talking about his dilemma about abolishing slavery. He says, "It is as if we have the wolf by the ear, and we can neither hold him nor safely let him go. Justice is on one scale and self-preservation on the other." So, self-preservation, that is, if they want to continue building the kind of country that they set out to continue, they have to hold us down. And they made a decision to do that, but they understand there's a price to pay. You will live in fear of the wolf that you're holding down. So that's characterized this country throughout its history. That was during slavery, and what it's meant in a more modern context is what Brother Aaron Dixon represents. That black youth, Brother Dixon, he'll tell the story, he was 19 when he founded the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. That black youth will organize themselves, organize as many people as we can to fight for our freedom by any means necessary. What is worse from the perspective of the people in power, the 1%, and much better from our perspective, is that we will inspire others to join both in solidarity with the black struggle and to take on their own struggles, to launch their own struggles. So the black struggle in the 1960s and 70s inspires the women's liberation struggle, it inspires the struggle against the Vietnam War, inspires the gay liberation struggle, and joins with indigenous struggle, and so on. I believe that understanding that is key to understanding just why they've invested so much into keeping black people down. I believe it explains mass incarceration. Why else would you lock up a million of us? There are more black people in prison today than there were enslaved in 1850. I think that this fear of the black population explains that. The understandings that we got regarding police violence that came in the past year since the murder of Trayvon Martin. The Malcolm X grassroots movement put out a study saying that every 40 hours a black person is murdered by law enforcement in the United States. They had to revise that a couple months later because it's every 36 hours. Well, it's explained by their fear of the black population. So I want to wrap up so we can hear Brother Aaron Dixon about one more thing. As we listen to what he has to say, as we listen to the history that he recounts, I think it's important to understand it not just as a history lesson, but to guide us in what we're doing today. Because I think we need to rebuild the struggle that he's talking about. We need to rebuild that today. Now, you will hear people say that there is something outdated about the Black Panthers and the Black Power movement, especially now that we have a black president. Why go outside of the system? We just have to give it time, and so on. To those who would say that there's something old-fashioned and outdated about a collective, mass, relentless struggle for our freedom, I would argue that it's the opposite. That we gain things, our rights, pride, access to education, social programs, jobs, and so on when we fought, like the Panthers did, and we have lost things when that fight subsided. Regarding a black presidency, for what it's worth, all indicators suggest that actually black people are worse off now than when Obama took office. That's just a fact. When we're looking at the unemployment rate, I mean, they're celebrating this recovery, which is minimal at best. There's been no recovery for black people whatsoever. Whether we're talking about the number of black people losing our homes to foreclosures, whether we're talking about the state of schools that black children go to, and so on. That has not gotten better since Obama's been in office, it's gotten worse. Now, my argument isn't that it's because we have a black president that it's gotten worse, but it hasn't helped. The fact that we had a black president has not abated the attack on black people. And so we do need to rebuild the struggle today. I believe we need to learn lessons of the past and think about what it means to understand those lessons in a new context. It is, we have to do what Brother Dixon did in his time and think, what does it mean to build the struggle today? And I believe that part of that is drawing a lesson that there was an heroic struggle in the 1960s and 70s that the system survived. And that what we need to do is build a fight that targets the system itself. Yes, there's any number of reforms that we need to fight for and win today. We need to stop the fact that people are losing their homes. We need to stop the racist police terror and so on. But ultimately, if we don't get rid of the system that thrives off of this racism, then I think that we're going to have to keep on fighting these battles. So I want to end on the point about getting organized. We should join organizations where they exist against mass incarceration, against police violence, in defense of affirmative action, and so on. Where those organizations don't exist, we should create those organizations. If you believe that we need a revolution, that fundamentally we need a transformation of society to get rid of oppression, I know a great organization called the International Socialist Organization. That's my organization. If you want to get involved with that, come talk to me or any one of the people in the back. In any event, let's put our heads together and figure out how we can build the broadest, most ferocious resistance to racism and all oppression today, because I believe it is as urgent today as it was in the 1960s. Thank you.
It is with great pleasure that I get to introduce Aaron Dixon, who's an ex-captain and co-founder of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party. He's a lifetime revolutionary who takes the spirit into everything he does even today. He ran in 2006 of the for U.S. Senate on the Green Party ticket, and he is author of My People Are Rising, published by Haymarket Books, and it is with great pleasure that we welcome him tonight. Thank you.
I'm applauding you guys for coming out in this blizzard we got here. You probably don't think it's a blizzard. But I'm going to start off, I'm going to have this handsome couple read an excerpt from the book, and then we'll kick it off. What's your name?
Texas' death had a heavy impact on all of us. His happy-go-lucky, comical ways had put everyone at ease, yet he could be serious and fearless when needed. He and Naomi had just started seeing each other. Both of them had been moving from relationship to relationship until they discovered their love for one another. Now Naomi was walking around like a zombie. For Lola, who was already unstable, his death was the defining event that pushed her over the brink, from which she could never recover. For her young mind, it was too many losses, one too many contradictions, something inside of her snapped. She slowly began to transform from the person she was into someone she wasn't. Therefore, before Texas' death, she did not drink or smoke. She was always home with the kids in the evening. She had always been conscientious and close to our little family. We were all trying to dull our senses, trying to deny what was happening, that our revolutionary family was coming to an end, and we would all have to make a decision when to leave our slowly disintegrating army. When to step outside the tent and facelift on our own. Those of us who were left were just barely holding on, functioning day to day, minute to minute.
Flores' absence was also felt. He had joined the Southern California chapter at 17. Flores was as smooth and calm as a clear morning sky. He was the only one in the security squad who had never seemed to cross the line. He never got drunk, never overindulged. He followed the party line, yet was still flexible enough to allow others to bend the rules and policies. He had always treated me with the utmost respect. We knew we were the last of the warriors, the last of a dying breed. We had become a strong force, feeling invincible at times. We had considered ourselves as eternal soldiers, always thinking we would fight the enemy to victory or to death. What we had failed to realize was that the enemy, at times, was us.
That was written in that was about 1978. That was when I left the Black Panther Party. I had joined the Black Panther Party in April of '68. I left almost 10 years to the date that I had joined. And what had transpired over those 10 years were, of course, the most amazing 10 years of my life, as well as those other members of the Black Panther Party. So, you know, it took me 15 years to really write this book, you know, because there was a lot of emotions, there was a lot of things that I was dealing with, and it wasn't an easy task. Plus, I was, you know, raising kids as a single parent myself. But I wanted to try to write something a little different than what had been written before about the Black Panther Party. And I started the book off really talking about my ancestors, the history of my ancestors on both sides and their journey out of slavery, and the different journeys that they took out of slavery. And you know, I remember living in a house with my great-great-grandmother who was born in 1867. And I remember just having some special connection to her. Her mother was a slave, and we heard stories from her about her mother. And all growing up, you know, my generation was part of what was called the oral tradition, which we don't really have anymore. But the oral tradition is something that all cultures have. That is what they use to preserve the culture, to preserve the family, to prepare the young people to take their place in the journey towards freedom and liberation. So you know, we were always hearing these stories from our parents, our grandparents, our aunts and uncles. They're always encouraging us and always pushing us forward. And I like to think that it was my ancestors that helped me survive those very trying times that I was in the Black Panther Party. So a lot of people don't realize that it was Malcolm X's death that led to the formation of the Black Panther Party. When Malcolm X was killed, that's when Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton got together and decided that they were going to start an organization to continue the work of Malcolm X and continue the work of the organization that he had created in Harlem. And so that was the early beginning of the Black Panther Party in 1966. You know, also, my generation was a generation that grew up during an era of constant political assassination. You know, we saw, when I was in the 9th grade, John F. Kennedy, the first Irish Catholic president, was assassinated. And he was one of the first presidents, along with his brother, Robert Kennedy, who really seemed to have a genuine interest in helping the success of the civil rights movement. So, you know, for the first time we had this president, you know, I'm talking about we in the black community, for the first time we had this president that really seemed to really care about what we were doing. It really meant a lot to us. You know, I remember when he was assassinated, that was the first time I saw my father cry. My father was a very strong man. He never cried. And, you know, I had a difficult time understanding why he was showing such emotion behind the death of John F. Kennedy. Then, of course, in 1964, Medgar Evers was assassinated. Medgar Evers was one of the powerful leaders of the civil rights movement. He was right up there, shoulder to shoulder with Martin Luther King. But he differed from Martin Luther King in that he carried a gun and he did believe in self-defense. But he was assassinated. Maybe that's why he was assassinated. A year later, after Medgar Evers is assassinated, Malcolm X is assassinated. And in 1967, I started going to the University of Washington. I helped start the first Black Student Union at the University of Washington. And we organized a protest against the high school, and we marched on the school and we closed it down. And that was our first little victory. And a couple of days later, I was arrested along with other leaders of the BSU, and we found ourselves in the King County Jail in Seattle. And while we were sitting there, the news came on, and the news announced that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. This is April 4th, 1968. And it was very devastating news for us young people to be sitting in jail when someone like Martin Luther King had been assassinated, even though we had differed from his tactics by that time, we still looked upon him as a hero. We still looked upon him. He was a man of love. He was a man of peace. And I had marched with Martin Luther King when I was about 12 or 13 years old. So I felt some special connection there when he was assassinated. But on the TV, it began to show the riots breaking out all across the country. You know, Harlem and Philadelphia and Chicago and Detroit. These riots began to break out in response to Martin Luther King's death. And of course, we wanted to be out there too, expressing our anger and doing what we had to do to show how we felt about his assassination, but we couldn't because we were in jail. So I remember going back to my jail cell that night and sitting by myself, and I remember saying to myself that, okay, this is it. This is it. We got to do something else. And I remember saying that the picket sign for me was going to be replaced with a gun. Now, I didn't realize that all across the country, young people all across the country were thinking the same thing. And not just young black people, but young Latino, young Native Americans, young Asian, young whites, were all thinking the same thing else. That they killed this man of peace, then it's time to do something else. It's time to create more militancy. It's time to pick up the gun and show that we really want to change this country. And so that really began. A lot of people don't realize that the death of Martin Luther King led to the expansion of the militant movement of the 60s, and particularly the Black Panther Party. So about a week later, I found myself in Oakland, in San Francisco, along with 20 members of the Black Student Union. We went down there to a Black Student Union conference, and Bobby Seale was supposed to come over and give the keynote address. But we heard about this funeral that was taking place over in Oakland. This young man named Little Bobby Hutton. Little Bobby Hutton was the first person to join the Black Panther Party, and he was only 14 years old. He was very symbolic of a lot of the young black men that we see today that are standing out on the corners. Because little Bobby Hutton dropped out of school when he was 14 years old because he couldn't read or write, and he was mad about that. And he came and joined the Black Panther Party. And while he was in the Black Panther Party at 14 years old, he learned how to read, he learned how to write, and he rose to the position of Minister of Finance in the Black Panther Party. On April 4th, when he was killed, Huey was in jail, Bobby Seale was also locked up, and there were some other members of the Black Panther Party who decided that they needed to go out and take some revenge. It wasn't a good plan, it wasn't a good idea, it wasn't something that Huey and Bobby would have endorsed. If Huey and Bobby had been out on the street, it would not have happened, but they were not there. And so 19 members of the Black Panther Party armed themselves, went out in cars, and ended up in a shootout with the Oakland Police Department. And little Bobby Hutton, along with Eldridge Cleaver, ran into an abandoned house. The house was surrounded by police. They shot thousands of rounds into the house, tear gas. Little Bobby Hutton, the only armed one of the two, Eldridge realized that they had to surrender. And so little Bobby Hutton threw his carbine out, and they raised their hands and went out into the night. Eldridge had been wounded by a tear gas canister, so he stumbled and fell. The police told little Bobby Hutton to run to the police car, and he did, and when he did, they opened up and shot him about 25 times. 17 years old. He was the first to join and the first to die. So we heard about this funeral, and so we traveled over to Oakland, and we went into the funeral. When we drove, we saw Marlon Brando standing out front with the Black Panther uniform on, a black beret. He was talking to Bobby Seale. He was always a strong supporter of the party and the Native American movement at that time. So we went into the church, and it was a very somber experience. It was the first time really I had been to one other funeral, but this was the second funeral I had been to, and I remember the cries of Bobby Hutton's mother and his aunts, and I remember going around and looking in the casket of little Bobby Hutton, and really thinking that, you know, okay, this is what the revolution is all about. This is what it's going to be about. It's going to be about death, and it was, and so Bobby Seale came over to San Francisco and gave a keynote speech at San Francisco State after the funeral. He was about 2 hours late. We waited for him. And, you know, he had just buried a very good friend of his, little Bobby Hutton. And there were, in this shootout, there were 18 members of the Black Panther Party that were arrested in that shootout. Some of them were wounded. Eldridge Cleaver was arrested and put back into, they were threatening him to send him back to San Quentin. So it was a very difficult time for Bobby Seale, a very emotional time for him as well. And the speech that he gave, I remember, is one of the most electrifying speeches that I have ever heard, even to this day. He must have spoke for about 2 hours. I remember during the speech he stopped and said, anybody in here got anything to drink? I had bought a bottle of vodka for my parents that I was going to give to them because it was cheaper in the Bay Area. And so I ran and got my bottle and took it up to Bobby, and he took a swig. He passed it around to the other comrades, and he began to speak more. So, so when he was over, I made a beeline, me and my brother and another comrade from Seattle, we made a beeline to Bobby Seale. We all met him at the same time, at the same spot. We said we want a chapter of the Black Panther Party in Seattle. A week later, he flies to Seattle. We met at my mother's house. We met over a 3-day period. There were about 20 young people there that we had already been organizing and doing things with. You know, we were involved with SNCC and the BSU, and they were all there. Some people brought their rifles. And for a 3-day period, we met with Bobby Seale and George Murray, the Minister of Education of the Black Panther Party. One of the first things that Bobby Seale told us was that we had to have, in order to be in the Black Panther Party, we had to have 2 guns, and we had to have 2,000 rounds of ammunition. We said, wow, man, okay. The next thing he told us was, he gave us a book list of 25 books and told us that we had to read these books. Not only did we have to read these books, we had to study 2 hours a day. And then we had to have political education class twice a week. And he began to go on and tell us about the history of the party and about Huey and who Huey was and what Huey meant to the Black Panther Party. And then he was gone. And so a week later, I get a call from Bobby saying, Aaron, I want you to come down to national headquarters. So, you know, I got my Panther uniform on. The Panther uniform was a black leather jacket, powder blue shirt, black pants, black beret, black. And, you know, I hopped on the plane. It was my first flight ever, first time ever flying. And I remember being real nervous and really, you know, wondering, you know, what was I getting myself into? The plane landed, and I got picked up at the airport by a brother named Robert Bay and Tommy Jones, 2 older brothers who were original members of the Black Panther Party, and they made me feel at ease. And they took me to Central National Headquarters on Grove Street, and there were other Panthers standing out there, and got a chance to go meet them. And Robert Bay took me around to his house, where he stayed with Landon and Randy Williams, 2 Vietnam veterans who were in Special Forces in Vietnam, but had came back and joined the Black Panther Party and were now captains in the Black Panther Party. Robert Bay was also a Vietnam veteran. He was a short, stocky brother with a big afro, deep voice. And the first thing that they did when I went to their house and met Landon and Randy, they went into their rooms and said, hey man, come look at our armaments. And each one had their own armaments. They had their own separate cache of weapons. And they began to show me their weapons and their reloading equipment. And I was like, woo, wow, these brothers are serious. Okay. So, you know, over the next few days, I spent some time with Bobby Seale. I was told I had to go down and visit Huey in Alameda County Jail, which I did. I ended up going to a meeting with Bobby Seale over in San Francisco at Don Cox's house. He was the field marshal of the Black Panther Party. And Stokely Carmichael was there. He had just been drafted into the Black Panther Party. David Hilliard, the national captain, was there as well, and some other Panther officials. And they began to meet and talk about rules for the membership of the Black Panther Party. I just remember sitting there, me as a 19-year-old kid from Seattle, college student, just kind of like soaking up everything and not really realizing, you know, well, I did realize, but just kind of like amazed that I was there with these men, you know, with these men who were dedicated to this new movement that was getting ready to take place. And so I went back to Oakland, and Friday, it was Friday, I was hanging out with Robert Bay and Landon and Randy and Orlando Harris, who was 16 years old. He was 15 years old when he joined the party. And we're hanging out in the kitchen, and they decided to introduce me to the Panther drink. The Panther drink, which was called, and on the street it was called Bitter Dog. It was dark port, wine, pour a little bit out, and squeeze them plastic lemon bottles, squeeze the juice in there, shake it up, and you had what was called Panther Piss. That was a Panther name for it, or the street name was Bitter Dog. So we're sitting there, we're standing in the kitchen talking, and you know how guys do when they get together. We're drinking, and they also shared some Brother Ruby with me, which was Panther code name for marijuana. So we're smoking Brother Ruby, drinking Bitter Dog. Landon is in the front room watching TV because he didn't drink or smoke. So we're sitting there talking, and all of a sudden we hear a loud bam, it's a gunshot. We ran into the living room, and Landon is sitting there with his .44 Magnum in his hand. And Robert Bay said, "Man, what happened, man? What'd you do?" He said, "Man, I'm tired. I got tired of watching the cowboys always killing the Indians. I got tired of that shit." So he blew his TV out. I said, "Damn, man, he's serious." And they said, "Okay, well, let's go." So they said, "Okay, let's go on down to 7th Street and get something to eat in West Oakland." So Tommy Jones had just given me, because he had asked me if I had a piece. I told him I had a carbine, 30 caliber carbine in Seattle, but I didn't have a handgun. So he went and got me a 90mm Llama with a holster and gave it to me. So we went down to West Oakland. This was Friday night in West Oakland. The streets are full on Friday nights in the ghettos at that time. Everybody's out having a good time, spending their tricks and getting drunk. And so we went to a restaurant and ate, and me and Orlando, we finished eating. We're the youngest of the group. We went outside to smoke our cool cigarettes. That was the cigarette of the movement, cool cigarettes. So, you know, a police car drives by, and Orlando starts yelling. He started yelling, "Pig, pig, you motherfucking pig, you better stop at that stop sign." Pig was our name for the police, pig. So I joined in too. I started yelling, "Pig, pig, you damn pig, you better stop." And so the pig goes around the corner, and he comes back, and he calls to back up. And pretty soon, 4 and 5, 6, 7, 8 police cars start showing up. And then Robert Bay, Landon and Randy and Tommy Jones, they come outside of the restaurant, and they see what's going on. And all of a sudden, something started happening very strange. I hear people yelling, "Man, I'm gonna go home, man, there's gonna be a shootout, man, let's get out of here, let's get out of here." So people like are running home, shops are closing. I swear within 5 minutes, all the shops are closed. And damn near the streets are empty. The only people who stayed out were the prostitutes. The prostitutes said, "We're gonna stay out here and watch our brothers." I said, "Right on." And so I remember, you know, Robert Bay said, "Spread out." Robert Bay said in his deep voice, he said to us, he said, "Spread out." And so we all spread out. Now the police, on the other hand, were all bunched up together. You could tell that they were afraid. They had much more fear than what we were exhibiting. We weren't exhibiting any fear. I'm sure we had it, but we weren't exhibiting it. And I remember thinking to myself, "Damn, what have I got myself into?" And I remember I see this young brother with a McClymon's jacket on. He's got a bag of groceries in his hand. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm saying, "Damn, I sure wish this brother would stay here and help us." And I looked at him, our eyes met, and I'm thinking this in my head, and he said to me, he said, "Brother, I would stay out here and help you, but I got to get home." He was gone. We were out there by ourselves. And pretty soon, one of the officers, a lieutenant, in front of the police, he's got his hand on his gun. Now we all have our hands on our guns as well. and Landon is in front of our group. And he starts walking towards Landon. He says, I'm going to search you. And Landon is backing up saying, no, you're not going to search me. And this went on for a few seconds. I'm going to search you. No, you ain't going to search me. And I'm thinking, I said, damn, he shot that TV out, man. Shit, they don't tell him what he might do. I remember the fear coming into me, and I remember my childhood flashing before me, and my parents and everything, and thinking to myself, I'll probably never see my family again. And just when we thought that things were going to pop off, while Landon is backing up, he trips over a garbage can top. And the garbage can top reverberates. And that just broke the ice. Because the police turned around, they didn't say a word, they turned around, and they got in their cars, and they drove off. And this was my baptism into the Black Panther Party. The very next day was Saturday. It was the day that they had all the Black Panther Party members throughout the whole Bay Area came together at St. Augustine's Church. And there was about 150 people there, people from Vallejo and San Francisco and Richmond and, all over the Bay Area. And it was just beautiful to be in this room with all these brothers and sisters who were dedicated to this organization called the Black Panther Party. It just felt really very powerful, and the way they accepted me, they were so, happy to see that they had a chapter, because we were the first chapter outside of California. And, I was just greeted so warmly and made to feel so welcome. So after the meeting, Robert Bay and Tommy Jones and I left and went back to the house. When we got to the house, the phone started ringing. And Robert Bay runs in, he grabs the phone, he said, yeah. He slams it down, he runs into the room, he comes out with 2 rifles and a box of ammo. He gives me a rifle and the ammo and said the pigs are vamping on the comrades at the church. So we jumped in the car and we drove down Grove Street about 60 miles an hour. Robert Bay said, man, you know how to load that? It was a 44 Magnum carbine. I'd never seen it before, but I said, yeah, I know how to load it. So I figured out how to load it. And I got it loaded, and I'm saying to myself, damn, here we go again. And so we got down to the church, and nobody was there. The pigs were gone, the comrades were gone, and I was glad that nobody was there. So that was 2 very important days of that week that I was in Oakland. The next day I was on a flight back to Seattle, and I knew what my mission was, was to organize the Black Panther Party chapter into a strong chapter of the Black Panther Party. The first 2 weeks after we opened up our doors and opened our office up, we had over 300 applications of people wanting to join. We had a couple of Asians. We had 2 Asians that joined, a Japanese guy named Mike Tagawa, who came right out of Vietnam, another young man named Guy Carosi, who was a black belt expert. And we had a lot of different people that came and joined. We had a lot of friends that we went to school with, and it was very powerful. It was a very powerful moment, And when we got our phones turned on, we started getting calls from the community. Can you help with this? Can you help with that? The police are bothering me. The police do this. My boyfriend's messing with me. My husband's bothering me. My landlord put the door off. So, we sent comrades, we sent Panthers to the house of some of these calls. It's 5 or 6 comrades with their rifles and shotguns. And, hey, if you mess with this woman again, we're going to come back and deal with you, So this was the first time the community had somebody that they could call. They couldn't call the police. Who else were they going to call? This was the first time they had somebody that they could call. I remember that there was a woman that called us. She had 7 kids. She couldn't pay her rent. The landlord took the door off her house. We sent the comrades to the landlord's house. They got the door. They got the door. They carried the door down the street. Put it back on the hinges. Put it back on the hinges. Put it right back up in there. And this was really very powerful, Now, we were getting too many calls from the community, because sometimes the community can take advantage of a good thing. I had been sending weekly reports down to Bobby Seale and we talked over the phone, and he had mentioned to me, he said, Dixon, you guys are going out on too many of these community calls. You guys got to cut back on that because we got other work to do. So with that in mind, I said, okay, we're gonna cut that out. So, you know, in Seattle, when we first started the Black Panther Party, there was not a law against carrying weapons out in the public. You know, when the Black Panther Party started in Oakland, that was one of the first things that they focused on, was working towards ending police brutality, because you had all these police officers from Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi that came to LA, that came to Oakland, and they brought all that racism and all that violence with them. And that was a very sore point in the black community. So Huey, being a law student, and someone who really believed in the Constitution of the United States, that was one of the first things that the Black Panther Party did, was besides that they were going to teach people in the community that they had a right to bear arms. That's what it says in the Second Amendment. They got a right to bear arms. And so the Black Panther Party in Oakland began in those early days going out and patrolling the police with weapons. You know, they get tape recorders, they got cameras, they learned the proper way of how to hold their weapons out in public. They learned the gun laws, and you know, 15 to 16 of them got in their cars and began to go out and patrol the police. They get behind the police car and follow him. When he stopped somebody from the black community, they would get out, they would inform the person that all they had to do was give the name, the address, and the security number. So you can imagine, you know, these armed Panthers with their rifles, shotguns, these Black Panther uniforms on. You can imagine the reaction of the police when they see these black men standing at attention. And there were several times when the police would decide that he was going to test Huey and the rest of the Panthers. And there was one incident, policeman says, "Nigga, what are you doing with those guns?" And Huey had his shotgun. He said, "Pig, what are you doing with your gun?" He jacked around in his shotgun. He said, "If you try to shoot me, I'm going to shoot you back. You try to kill me, I'm going to kill you. Because I have a right to have my weapon, and there's nothing you can do about it." And this happened over, you know, a 6-8 month period. And eventually, they caught Huey when he was out being social, and one evening, and they tried to arrest him. And a policeman was killed, another policeman ended wounded. Huey ended up with 2 bullets in his stomach. And he was charged with attempted murder, and he went on trial for attempted murder. And that really also began the explosive growth, the need for the Black Panther Party to grow so that we could make sure Huey would not go through the gas chamber. In the early years of the Black Panther Party, there were a lot of really rough brothers that joined the Black Panther Party. You know, a lot of brothers from the streets, a lot of ex-hustlers, a lot of ex-pimps, some ex-drug dealers, a lot of Vietnam vets. And as the party began to grow, a lot of college students began to also join the Black Panther Party. And the Black Panther Party also had a newspaper that we put out. And that newspaper, for the whole time that the party existed, I think it was about 16 years that the party was in existence, there was only one or maybe 2-week period when that paper didn't come out. Because we understood how important that paper was. We understood that it was important to have our own political organ to get out what the party was about, to talk about what was going on in the community. And so as the party grew around the country, you know, our party, there was always a ministry of information in each chapter and branch, which was responsible for writing articles and taking pictures and sending them to national headquarters. You know, at national headquarters, you had a layout, worked on the newspaper. They would be up 2 and 3 nights laying out the newspaper, getting it all ready. And then there was the distribution of the newspaper also took a whole, you know, from 7 to 5 in the morning. Because as the Black Panther Party began to grow, we had a circulation of its height of 350,000 papers a week that we sent out worldwide. And by this time we had, so the Black Panther Party, one of the great things about the Black Panther Party was that they understood the importance of mass coalition building. And we had coalitions with, starting off with the first important coalition was with the Peace and Freedom Party. That was in 1967, before I even joined the party. But as the party began to grow, we developed coalitions, all types of coalitions with all types of people, because we weren't just fighting for black people. We were fighting to change America. We were fighting to create a better society for everyone, where everybody would have the freedom to express themselves. Everybody would have the freedom to grow. And as the party began to grow, we also had international organizations all around the world. We had international support organizations in Japan, in Korea, in France, in Sweden, and even in the Philippines, in India. In India, they had a Black Panther Party chapter, which is still in existence today. In Palestine, we had the Black Panther Party support organization. So we were becoming a worldwide organization. Now, we didn't know that in 1968, J. Edgar Hoover, Richard Nixon, Attorney General John Mitchell, they called a press conference. And they said that the Black Panther Party was the #1 threat to the security of America. And I remember watching that press conference, but we had no idea what they had stored for us. We didn't know about COINTELPRO, the secret program that they were going to launch on us. We didn't know that they had discussed among themselves that they were going to have us wiped out by 1969. 1969. Over a year later, they were going to have us wiped out. So they began to raid our offices. They began to arrest party members, arrest different members of the leadership of the Black Panther Party. And Eldridge Cleaver had to go in exile by 1969. Eldridge Cleaver had to go in exile. Huey's already in prison. And they began to raid chapters and branches. There were some chapters that never even got off the ground, like the Omaha, Nebraska chapter. And when they were beginning to organize in those early years, they got infiltrated. Their leaders got charged with attempted murder. And to this very day, those two brothers who were organized the Omaha chapter in 1968 are still in prison to this very day.
Jesus.
New Jersey, the same thing happened with the New Jersey chapter. The head of the New Jersey chapter got charged with killing a police officer. This was 69, somewhere 69, and to this very day he's in prison. The Baltimore chapter got heavily infiltrated, and the head of the Baltimore chapter is in prison to this very day. We're talking about over 40 years these brothers have been in prison. So this was part of their tactic to infiltrate the party, try to stop us from getting off the ground, and we had no idea what was in store for us. Because the party read a lot, we knew that nothing stood outside of change. Our leader, Huey, was a very philosophical person. He had gotten his PhD in philosophy later on. But we had it drilled in our minds that nothing stands outside of change. And so we knew we always had to be changing. And so by 1969, we got the orders to stop wearing our Panther uniforms because they were separating us from the community. And the community was becoming more afraid of us. So we took our combat boots off, our army fatigue jackets, because we were walking around like urban guerrillas. And so we took all that off and started dressing more like the people. And then we also realized that we had to, in order to build more relationship with the community, the only way that we were going to survive and stay alive was we had to get close to the community. And we had to organize the community. We had to help the community. Now, the Vietnam War was going on at that time. There was all the resources were being used for the war, so there was a lot of poverty, there was a lot of hunger in the community. So we started what was called the survival program. And the first survival program we started was a free breakfast for school children program. And we went to community centers, we went to churches that were near elementary schools, we asked permission to use their facilities, and we went out in the community, and in the community we got food donated. I mean, the first food we got for our breakfast program in Seattle was we raided my parents' kitchen, icebox, refrigerator. My mother still talks about that. And so, we started opening up these breakfast programs because we said, how can little Johnny learn that 5 apples and 4 apples is 9 apples? He ain't even had an apple. So we started these breakfast programs all across the country. all across the country. In Seattle, we eventually opened up 5 breakfast program locations in all the major housing projects. In LA, they were feeding thousands of kids. Chicago was feeding thousands of kids. New York was feeding lots of kids. Boston was feeding lots of kids. All over the country, we're feeding all these kids breakfast as they go to school every single morning. Of course, there were people in the party who didn't think this was revolutionary, and they left the party because they couldn't see the value in feeding hungry kids as being revolutionary. Then we opened up, then we realized that we had doctors that came to us that wanted to support what we were doing. They wanted to, they helped some of our wounded. And then we started opening up free medical clinics. Because there were no community medical clinics at that time. There were no small community medical clinics in the community. If you wanted to go see a doctor or something, you had to go to the hospital. So we got doctors, and we began to open up community medical clinics. The Seattle chapter opened one, Portland chapter, LA chapter, the Boston chapter, Chicago chapter, and North Carolina, Winston-Salem chapter, and the Harlem chapter. They started a free ambulance program because, the joke at that time, and it's probably still the same here, that when you call 911 for an ambulance, the ambulance ain't coming to the ghetto. So what we said was, in those places, we said, we got it in Harlem, they got an old ambulance and fixed it up. They did the same thing in North Carolina. We had a free ambulance program, a people's ambulance program. We started a busing the prisons program. We started a free shoe program, free clothing program, liberation school. We started giving out bags of groceries out of our office once a week. And so wherever there was a need, 40 minutes or 40 seconds? Okay. Wherever there was a need, we filled that need. We filled that need. The liberation school, at the time, there were no summer programs that were taking place in the country, for working families. During the summer, when a working mother had to go to work, she had to find somebody to watch her kids. So we said, okay, we're going to fill that void. We started what was called the liberation school during the summer. And when parents had to go to work, they could drop their kids off at the liberation school. And we fed them breakfast, we fed them lunch. We took them on field trips. We gave them political education, told them about who Malcolm X was and who Huey was and Bobby Seale. Chuck D, I'm sure most of you know who Chuck D is, but Chuck D got his political education in the Liberation School in New York. That's where he got his political education. So all the time they're starting these raids, starting to raid the Black Panther Party offices and arrest Black Panther Party members. Even they seem to escalate. When the program started, they seemed to really escalate their attack on us. They even came with guns into the breakfast program in LA and the breakfast program in Chicago and other places to try to scare the kids away. But our orders were, you just keep on doing what you got to do. So now something happened in December, January of 1969, and it was the first real big heavy blow, and that was in LA. There was a young man named Bunchy Carter and John Huggins. They were the leaders of the Southern California chapter. When the Southern California chapter was one of the baddest chapters that we had. They had some bad brothers in Southern California and sisters. So Bunchy Carter, when he came out of prison, San Quentin, he was known as the mayor of the ghetto. He was once head of the largest gang in LA called the Slossons. And he left the Slossons and joined the Black Panther Party. And a lot of those members of the Slossons joined the Black Panther Party with him. And in January of 1969, Bunchy Carter and John Huggins were assassinated on the college campus of UCLA. And that was a very devastating blow, particularly to the Southern California chapter. They would never recover from that because there was not another Bunchy Carter. There was not another John Huggins. Around that time period, we were working like 7 days a week. Because we had orders, every party member had to go out and sell 100 papers. because we understood the importance of getting that information out. Plus, the paper provided revenue. Besides going out selling 100 papers, you had to work in the breakfast program. At 6 in the morning, you got up and you had to go down and work in the breakfast program, come back and go out in the field. Then you had to, work. If you worked in one of the various programs like the medical clinic or the busing the prison program, you had to work on that. And when you came in from the field, dinner was usually prepared. And you ate, and then we had weapons class, and then we had political education class, and everybody had to go on security from 10 to 12, 12 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6. Everybody had to do security because our offices were being constantly raided. We also had to, at this period, we had to start fortifying our offices with sandbags and steel gates and make sure we had gas masks. I remember my brother and I, we got our last financial aid check from the University of Washington. It was $1,700 each. And we spent our whole checks on guns and ammo and gas masks. I remember the Seattle Times came out with a little article, Dixon brothers spend their financial aid check. So now in December, the Chicago chapter was organized by a young man named Fred Hampton and Bobby Rush. Fred Hampton was 19 years old. I think Bobby might have been 20 years old. And one of the first things that Fred Hampton did was he went down to the Black Gangster Disciples, the Blackstone Rangers, the two largest gangs in the world at that time. And I'm from Chicago. I remember the Blackstone Rangers. I remember riding around Chicago. Everywhere you went, you saw Blackstone Rangers. And he went down and told them that they had to stop fighting each other, or they were going to have to deal with the Black Panther Party. And the FBI heard about, this possible truce between these three organizations, and so they got involved. Now, the Blackstone Rangers did change their name to the Black Peaceful Nation, and they began to work with the Black Panther Party. The Black Gangster Disciples, on the other hand, I got 45 minutes? Oh, okay. So, anyway, the next thing that Fred Hampton did was he went down, he met Cha-Cha Jimenez, a Puerto Rican who was head of the Young Lords organization, and told Cha-Cha, hey man, you guys need to, start working with the party. And so Cha-Cha, they changed their name, they changed direction, they kept their name, and they started working with the Black Panther Party. So that means the party was started organizing with the Puerto Rican community. Then Fred Hampton went down to the white community in Chicago where the poor whites lived to start working with that community. And they formed the first Rainbow Coalition, Black, Latino, and whites in Chicago. And he became a big threat to the Mayor Daley machine, because Mayor Daley had been mayor for 34 years. And this was a threat to his organization. So anybody who met Fred Hampton, I had a chance to speak with Fred Hampton. We spoke together in Chicago, at the University of Chicago, and anybody who met this man, they said, oh my God, this is somebody special. This is a special young man. I mean, when he talked, he sounded like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King all rolled into one. He was just an unbelievable human being, and he was so dedicated. He was the most dedicated of us all. He was so dedicated, Chicago comrades had to actually tie him down in the chair so he could get some rest. One time, there was a policeman in front of the Chicago office, and he went down and disarmed the policeman and handcuffed him and called the police so to come get him. He was a heroic, he was a huge figure. So on the evening of December 3rd, Fred Hampton had been meeting with his staff, because we met a lot. We had to meet. We were always meeting and planning because we had so much work to do. We had to meet and plan. That was very much a part of what we did. So Fred had been meeting with his staff, maybe about 8 to 10 people at his house. He didn't know that the security person was an FBI informant, and that he had given the ATF a layout to Fred Hampton's house. He didn't also know that he had put some Seconal in Fred Hampton's drink. And so on the morning of December 4th, Mark Clark, the captain of the Peoria, Illinois chapter, was on guard duty. A knock comes on the door. He goes to the door with his shotgun and says, who is it? Shots rang out. They go through the door instantly and kill Mark Clark. The same within the same minute, the ATF burst through the rear door, the back door. They come running in with their machine guns. They get all the Panthers up and put them in the against the wall, machine gun. They go into Fred Hampton's room. His wife tries to wake him. His wife's 6 months pregnant. She tries to wake him. They lower their machine gun and they killed him while he was in his sleep, 21 years old. That's how afraid of this young man that they were. Just when the party was beginning to start, we got hold of some documents that said that the government was they had orders to kill a Messiah. If a black Messiah arises, kill this black Messiah right away. In our mind, Fred Hampton was that black Messiah. And when I got the call, I was at the office in Seattle. I sent everybody out to the breakfast program. I remember getting the call from June Hill, the assistant chief of staff, at 8 o'clock in the morning. Phone up, he says, Aaron, they killed Fred Hampton. And I remember, that was the saddest day of my life. The whole 10 years I was in the Black Panther Party, that was my saddest day. Because I knew that they had killed the next great American. And that was Fred Hampton. He was going to be the next great American, 21 years old. 4 days later, the ATF goes to the LA chapter. LA chapter, the most military-minded of all the chapters, because they had the most fascist police department in the world in LA. And so the Panthers in LA were always prepared and always ready. They had built a bunker inside their office, a sandbag bunker. They had a lot of Vietnam vets. They had built tunnels, underground tunnels in their office. They built a machine gun nest on the second floor. And we used to always get calls of people trying to warn us that an attack was coming. We got calls in Seattle, we're going to come get you niggas tonight. Sometimes there was a friendly voice saying, they're going to come raid you tonight. So, we never knew that they were going to come, but we knew that at some point they were going to come. So this particular night, the LA chapter was pretty much prepared for this raid. And they began this assault on the LA chapter. The comrades had taken all the chairs and all the tables and put them on both sides of the door. Because they knew, you've seen the movies how the ATF the SWAT team burst through the door and they go to the left and some go to the right. And the SWAT team came about because of the Black Panther Party. And so anyway, the comrades took the chairs and the tables on both sides of the door and they had this bunker. And so when this raid started, they burst through the door. The ATF, the FBI, the LA pigs, they burst through the door. They couldn't go right, they couldn't go left because the chairs were there. And this bunker was facing them. And the comrades just opened up on them and blew them out the door. And they had a shootout that lasted for 6 to 8 hours. And on the second floor, they were literally fighting room to room. Finally, the community woke up. The community was out on the streets in mass. It was daylight. And there were several Panthers in there that were wounded. There was a sister in there that was shot in both her legs. And even though she was shot, she still continued to fire. And they finally had to put up the white flag and surrender. And they all went out, 18 of them. They were arrested, charged with attempted murder. How can you be charged with attempted murder for trying to defend yourself? So that was what was going on. And 3 days later, the ATF comes to Seattle because Ed Hoover sent a memo out. He wanted 3 chapters destroyed. There were Chicago, LA, and Seattle. And so they go to the mayor's office and he tells the mayor, that they have automatic weapons. We want to raid them. The mayor says that they don't have automatic weapons. And so the mayor saw what happened in Chicago. He saw what happened in LA. And Seattle was a liberal city at the time. It was a much smaller place than Chicago and LA. We were very much entrenched in the community. Everybody knew who we were. And he decided that he didn't want to have our bloodshed on his hands. So he told the ATF, I am not going to give you backup to raid their office. And so it didn't happen. And to this very day, I have Mayor Wes Owen to thank for our lives. Now, when he went to the mayor's convention in 1971, they met him at the door and said, you are not welcome, because he would not let this attack happen. So I don't have how much time do I have? Way past, okay. So let me just say that, we by 1972, we changed tactics again, and we saw the importance of being involved in the political arena. Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman congresswoman, decided to run for president. We were the first black organization that ran out to support her. You know, a lot of the black politicians, they didn't want to support her. They felt she was stepping out of bounds as a black woman announcing her presidency. But we supported her because we saw the importance in that. But we also began to run Bobby Seale for mayor and Lane Brown for city council. And that was one of the most powerful campaigns that I have ever seen. One of the most powerful organizing feats I had ever seen. You know, all the best organizers were brought from all over the country. You know, all of the best writers, the best organizers, the best photographers, everything. And we conducted this campaign, and we put 300 people out on the street every single day registering people to vote. People who had never registered to vote. Oakland was 60% black, 10% Latino, never had a black or Latino person on the city council or mayor. So anyway, you know, we conducted this campaign. We kicked off the campaign by giving away 10,000 bags of groceries with a chicken in every bag. That was no easy feat. That was no easy feat. There were many nights of being up all night and working. I mean, we worked. There were many nights that we went 3 nights without sleep because we had other things to do besides organizing for the campaign. And I remember when Bobby Seale announced when we had the big event at the Oakland Auditorium, and Bobby Seale threw his hat into the ring and announced his candidacy for mayor, and the curtain went up behind him, and there were 5,000 bags of groceries that we proceeded to give out. And we gave out another 5,000 bags in East Oakland. And when the voting finally started, you know, we had vans, Panthers with vans and cars. We had a lot of community workers. We went door to door, taking old people out. There were black people who had never voted before. We took them out of their house and put them in the vans and took them to the polling places. We had Panthers and volunteers standing on all the freeway overpasses, standing on all the corners with the big signs, Bobby Seale for mayor, Lane Brown for city council. It was just tremendous. We had no idea that we were going to come as close as we did, but we almost won. Bobby Seale had just gotten out of prison in Connecticut, charged with attempted murder. And he almost won. He almost won. And so, okay, yeah, we got to end it. So, I'm going to stop there. And you can read the book. You can read the book and find out what else happened, what else transpired. But first of all, I want to do this. I want to ask these two comrades to come up here. You guys come up here for a minute real quick. Okay, now, this is Pete Alameda. How old were you when you joined the party? 17. 17. Bubba, James Young, 16 years old when he joined the Harlem chapter. Come up here, sister. What's your name?
My name is Makeda Kamara. I'm from Panama to go to Brenda.
Okay. All right. So, these brothers and sisters, they dedicated their lives to the struggle and to the Black Panther Party. We gave up everything. We gave up everything for this struggle and for this movement. And we're just, by the grace of God, we're still alive today. So, thank you, and